Welcome. Welcome. My name is Elliot Church. I'm one of the directors of Big Data Ignite. My co-director is Tuhin Mitra. Tuhin, raise your hand. You're somewhere in the back, I believe. This is the keynote address for Thursday, and it is my pleasure to introduce David Devries. David is the CIO of the state of Michigan and also the director of the Department of Technology Management and the Budget. So he oversees a huge set of agencies, which I hope he will describe. He has a long career before serving the state of Michigan in the federal government, which is very interesting, and I look forward to hearing about it. I also have learned today that David Devries originates here in West Michigan. And in fact, he originates from a place very close to where I currently live. So I consider us to be neighbors displaced in time. But with that, let me introduce David Devries, and please join me in welcoming him with a round of applause. Thank you, David.
Good morning. Good morning. There you go. So, I'm Dave Devries. I grew up in Holland, Michigan. I ran away at age 18. And I came back 40 years later. Sound familiar to a Bible story? So I grew up in Holland, went to the Christian schools there. And I was faced with, when I was going through high school, I had to make choices even then. And I didn't have the benefit of data back then. But I ran out of time because I was busy doing track. I was doing singing stuff. I was doing band stuff. And then around age 15, this thing called girls came in. And I just ran out of time. And then talking to my high school counselor, I said, I want to go on to college. I don't know what I want to do. I want to spend some time in this service. I saw this hat, this uniform that my dad had. I thought that was cool. So I want to do that. How do I do all that? He says, join one of the academies. And I said, what is an academy? He says, well, you apply. You got to go meet your congressman. Congressman, who's that? I mean, I'd heard something in government class, and that was about all I knew. So I did all that. I was accepted into West Point, went through 4 years there, and then you have to spend 5 years in service. I was a benefit of enjoying life. I had fun, and I stayed on. And so I spent 30 years in the Army, lived around the world. I would tell you I may have gray hair, but I survived raising 3 teenage daughters by being overseas during their entire teenage years continuously, where you don't have the cell phones back then that we do today. So you had one phone on the wall, and you paid for it by the incoming call and the outgoing call. And if mom and dad can listen in, you're not going to talk like you did when I was a teenager. They don't drive till you're 18, so I didn't have that problem. You all buy your clothes at the same place with 3 daughters. I knew where they were going to buy their clothes at. So you didn't have this, I buy mine from here, you buy yours from there, and how come I can't buy mine from there, and so forth. And all the parents knew each other. So I had a good time as a father, and they played sports, and they did all that kind of stuff. And I was home for most of those years as a teenager there. I may have been deployed out a few times, but by and large, we were together. And then we came back to the States. Then I faced reality. Suddenly, all 3 daughters could drive in the same month in Northern Virginia with 300,000 of my best friends. So Dad said, no, you're not. You will wait a year, and you might go through the driver's training now. So that's just a little bit about me and my family and how we grew up there. Spent close to 30 years in the military, Army, but again, a lot of that was more joint stuff. Many different opportunities. All of it dealing with, a lot of it was, how do I exchange information? How do you secure it? How do you protect it? How do you share it with somebody else? How do you make sure that somebody else is not getting it? Same thing we're facing today on a bigger universal front there. It's just that was our main raison d'etre, is how do I share data there? Left there after 38 years there, was asked, I was coming back to Michigan at that time, I'd hoped, because as the years went by, the pull from Michigan became harder and harder. I had family here, I had daughters that wound up here, grandson. And I wanted to come back, and it kept getting harder. And then I had one more request on me, so I went to Office of Personnel Management. They are best known for the breach of 21.5 credentials that went out the door. I reacted to that from within inside the Department of Defense at that time, and so got a little bit of experience on that too, you might say. And then I came back here. I am now the director of Dtmb, Department of Technology Management and Budget. And then, as the governor liked to say when he asked me to come back here, he says, in the nighttime, you can just do that CIO stuff because you can do that with your eyes closed. I'm not sure about that because this is a huge state, and it's a wonderful state. And I got about 3,000 employees that work for me, and we got a bunch of contractors that help support along the way there too. What does Dtmb do? We run everything for the state, like all the state facilities. I am the lead procurement official for the state, so if you want to buy road salt for the highways, that comes through my department. If you want to buy IT people, that comes through my department. So all procurement stuff. I do all the maintenance on the buildings. I do all the rentals for the buildings that we don't want to buy. And then we run retirement funds for the teachers and the government employees and the judicial branch and the National Guard and so forth. So it's all those things that make things tick, the back office as I call it, but it's that broad, diverse thing there. And then we also run a centralized IT throughout the state, which is really the fun part of my job, and that's about the data side of the house. So you might say that Michigan has come a long ways. 2010, when this administration came in, I had just retired from the Army. I was then a senior person at the Department of Defense. And again, we were worried about data, and we were worried about sharing it with our intelligence friends, with our other nations like Canada, Australia, and so forth. Some of that more protected stuff there. We were worried about how to protect things there. Same thing was happening here in Michigan, but this is kind of what it was. Everybody was walking on the street, and you just never knew when you were going to fall into something, or something bad was going to happen to you. We've all learned from that stuff. And Michigan has been the era of regeneration and remaking there. As Governor Snyder says, it is a comeback state, and a lot of things from the economic side of the house to everything else is now coming back. And it's because of people like you that have made that thing happen. And a lot of it is, how do I build jobs and how do I make things happen? And you're doing that through data and data analytics side of the house. And that's part of the reason why I was excited to be asked to be here today, because it is about the data, it's about the information. State of Michigan, all the different departments there, we don't do a thing except help manage data. We don't make that license tag that goes on your car. I take your money and I make the processing and I do that kind of stuff, and you get the license plate in the mail along with the annual sticker. I do it for the small businesses, for the licensing of how you get your small business stood up and the permits and so forth. We manage the information there. It's important that we do that, but then that results in a whole lot of data. How do I protect that data, and where do we go from there? That's the exciting journey that Michigan has been underway of how do I protect that stuff and how do I share it. And I'll come up with some more stats here for you too. So where we are today, after that long journey, we're all walking, and we're having a good time on this thing. You might even say some of us are running. But we're in this thing together here, and we may be bridging across something, but this is where we are all together there, whether you're on the east side of the state, the west side of the state, the upper peninsula, the middle part, you are reaching out to each other, and you need to keep doing that. And so I just say this is the good time for the state of Michigan, and I'm proud to be here with this. If I do this, we'll see what happens. They are walking. I happen to be on this walk. This is the walk across the bridge this last Memorial Day. Some of you may have remembered that day because that was the day we shut the bridge down. So I was amazed at 5 o'clock in the morning how many cars were coming from the UP down to the southern side, because we closed it down at 6. And you were not going to come down south until 12 noon, 6 hours later. So there was more cars jammed up there trying to get across the bridge at 5 o'clock in the morning because of the closure. But again, it's about people, thousands of people that came from the north, came from the south to walk that thing. And it's a moment of pride. It's a moment of walking together there. Had I walked across that bridge before? No. To me, it was exciting being back in the state and just having the opportunity to do it. And that's really what this state is all about. What's up there? No? Thank you. Oh, that's not you guys clapping? So we talked a little bit about the comeback part of the state already. That's what drew me back here, besides family, was coming back here to a state that's really been making a lot of difference in things. Michigan is recognized around the United States for many different things. Automotive stuff. We are the lead yet on engineering principles, research and development for automotive. But what is a car today? A car today is not a bunch of metal and rubber and plastic and so forth. It is filled with nothing but sensors all over the place. I come from Western Michigan. Anybody here from the Holland-Zeeland area besides him? Ever hear of a company called Gentex? I used to pick up potatoes in the field right there. That's where my grandfather's farm was adjacent to that. It is now 2 large buildings. Every day, 5,000 people go to work there. That blew my mind. And there's another company down the road, again, a few thousand. So we got businesses going up all over the place. That's data that is being produced, manufacturing, and little parts made there, and they go someplace else there. Michigan is leading the way with that, from the technology side of the house to how I put those things into wonderful things that improve our lives every day. Down south, we make products for the home, Whirlpool, major headquarters there. I can go north, and we have major producing things there. Michigan is great about that. How do we get that word out there and bring it back in? How do I look at you and find out how do I attract other people to come in here? Because that's our biggest challenge is the workforce. That's another major initiative that the governor put me on was how do I improve the workforce here? We're all crying about it. And what I'm seeing is as people, if I look at any one company, they'll say, oh, I'm doing okay. My employment rate is 85%, 90%. Problem is when you're hiring Timmy to come in here, you stole Timmy from this company. That company is now hiring, and it's just a revolving door. I saw the same thing in Silicon Valley. It's still happening there. The prices and the salaries are different, but it's just we're moving things around there. How do I get more influx of students? How do I get more influx of young people that want to learn the sharp trades, the technology, the data business? How do I excite them and then make it so that the jobs are here for them to stay put in their hometown or someplace else? I'm the prodigal son that ran away for 40 years. And for the first 20 years, I would tell you, I would come back here to visit all the time. But there was nothing here driving me to come back. That changed in my later years. Part of it was family. But also recognizing I didn't have a tie back here to the jobs and the data and so forth. You guys had that, and I want to use this forum today to help keep pushing that thing and pushing you to help spread the word. You know, right now today, if you look at the economic side of the house of Michigan, unemployment is at an all-time low. And our pay per household has gone up. If you look at the stats, it is incredible, the amount that we've either stayed the same or gone upwards. And I've been up into the UP and the remote parts there, other parts of the lower part of Michigan here. It is amazing the things that are happening there. And a lot of that is the broadband, the use of technology, the use of computers is enabling that to happen so that people can work from home. People can work remotely, if you will, and still tie back in securely to it there. Across the state, what do I have right now? I have the data. It started small. Probably back in the 1990s, from the Health and Human Services side of the house, we said, send me this data here. And there was a big push from the federal side to bring it up there to the federal level. So the states became the repository from the state level thing. Dtmb, I provide that service to the state from the medical side. I have a lot of data sitting in databases and so forth. Now I'm trying to figure out how do I get it out of something that I have to pay for, I have to refresh the technology on it. Oh, I hear there's clouds. I heard some this morning, it's raining outside. So we're going to the cloud side of the house. How do I put data analytics on top of that? How do I know who's coming into it? Because my data is used for both downward with the professions, so they know how to provide better care, medical care, the benefits side of the house, but also for the study group, for the researchers, to know where do we need to spend more time on? Where do I need to reach outside the state to get help on? And then, of course, a lot of it flows in information back up to the federal level and national level. My biggest challenge, both here in the state, but also when I was with DoD, I might offend some people here, was the research and development community. Why? Because they are wonderful, wonderful people, and they live in the wild, wild west. I just want to think great things, I want to do great things, and I don't want any boundaries. I don't care about security, I just care about data. I just want to share my data. I want to share the data from this country and from that country, just let me have it. Problem is, I have no bones with that. It's all the other people that like to come in there. So we got to have some kind of bounds on the research side of the house. But again, as I said, Michigan, on the automotive side, on the medical side, we're the leading state on many of those things there. We have to worry about protecting that data somehow. And also for the researchers, because the last thing I want to have is where a researcher thinks he's looking at a good data set, and it's not really a good data set. It skews what they come up with. In the intelligence world, I used to do that all the time to nations and so forth. If I wanted to think one thing, I would show them something else, and they would start thinking that way. That's called intelligence, but it happens on the research side of the house too, because there's money tied to research. There's money tied to results coming out of it. If I can get to it first, and I can throw off your stuff, then why would I not do it? That's happening there, but that's why from the medical side, from the automotive side, from every technology field, we're worried about our intellectual property and how do I protect that data. I used to say that DoD, we led the way with standards for security. We did. I would tell you in the last 10 years when I was the deputy DoD CIO, my main thrust was I don't want to have the standards just applied to DoD. Because I was already pushing my compute, my devices there to the outside world, to the citizens, to the commercial side of the house. Why? Because I no longer had the niche on how to do that inside DoD. It was costing me too much money, and I couldn't train up the workforce to keep current with it. I could never kept up with the Amazons of the world and a few other ones there. So how do I employ that while keeping the security there? I broke out of there. The next thing we said, well, we have to worry about security because not every company is treated the same. So there I made standards with the NIST community to come up with what we now today have the NIST standards. It applies to federal, to all the agencies there, and down to the state and local government. I have a person here, Paul Grohl. He's part of our cloud services side. My biggest challenge is I want to know where my clouds are, but I want to know how they're protected. That's my data. That's the state's data. That's the people's data. I may share it out, but I want to know how it's protected. And I want to know that from every other company out there. The companies, you should worry about that. How do I do that across the board here? That's why we come up with the FedRAMP process through the federal space. The larger ones, like the Amazons of the world and the Microsofts and so forth, they are not participating with that. Now we've got to drive down the prices. I used to pay a hefty premium in DoD. As soon as I said, I want something, they said, oh, ka-chink, ka-chink. I'll give you that service because I can charge you more because you require all this top security stuff. And then when we made that standard go to the federal space, all the federal guys got ka-chink, ka-chink. I can charge you more because you all require more security. Guess what? With all this stuff that has happened over the past 5-6 years, we're on the same boat. So this is where I've been on a roll for the past 4 or 5 years. I want the banks to help me pay for that. Because that affects every one of your paychecks, every one of your pocketbooks. If that gets hacked, gets structured about there where I can no longer trust it, we all go down. So I want them to help pay for that security. They're now picking up some of that tab. Some of the other ones that are out there doing the same thing, they always ran their own networks. I want them to help us drive down the price of security on the networks because we all need the security, and it should not be something that you got to pay your firstborn's life with to have it be there. So security is important, data is important. Where are we at right now within the state? We got several different initiatives, pilots, underway with how do I take these large lakes, as I call them, and put analytics to it. I'm at the cross stage on that, working with some of the academias and some of the other ones there to help do some of that stuff there. But when I look at my treasure trove of data, how do I apply the analytics? And I don't want one company. I don't want one type of search and correlation type capability. I want a few of those. Problem is, every time I put a request for proposal out there or questions to be answered, I get thousands of ideas back. My challenge is how do I select from there? Being a state, just like the counties and so forth have to do, I have to abide by procurement things where I have to get the competition there and so forth. So if you're a vendor out there, I need you to help figure out how we do this thing smartly. There's enough business for us all to keep the economy going and to keep people employed. The good may consume some of the other ones that are not as good. That happens in business. But together we can still make this thing go where how do I put the security in place? How do I do the data analytics on top of that? That's why it's important for me as a state CIO to get out there once in a while and see some of the stuff that's happening. I can't just live in the world of the big data. And where I came from, we used to mash together a whole lot of things. It's a little bit different now as a state level. And when I go down to the counties, it's even a smaller one, but they can get so much more benefit by putting some of these things together there. So on a final note, I'm just going to say I appeal to you to think about the public sector side of the house. If you're a student, college age, high school, I've had a blast. If your idea is to go out there and make $1 million in your first year of life, you probably won't do that in the public side of the house. But the job satisfaction is immense. And I'm old, but I've had a fun life. And I just want to say thank you for all you do here in the western side of the state. And thank you for inviting me here to talk today. But I want to now just free up the time here to get some questions and answers from you of what you may have of me from a state director, what you may have of me from my previous life as a Department of Defense and that kind of stuff. I'm a bit bigger one there. Because that's where my give back to you is here now. And I would probably ask you just to come up to the microphone just so people can hear what the question is.
A quick question, a little technical. I noticed that some states are starting to use blockchain in their operations, such as automobile registration. Has Michigan got any plans for that? Just curious.
Yes. Again, blockchain today is evolving of how you do it. And what's neat about blockchain is you do get the inherent security and the immutable facts of where it came from and so forth. I love that about it. What does it rely on? What does cybersecurity rely on? Okay, energy. Cryptography in what respect? It really comes down to cryptography because I'm going to hash it or change it and protect it and split them up and so forth. That's just the technology. But it's protecting the identity. So it starts with the identity. How do you manage the identities? How do I manage the identities of who started this transaction and where it gets passed off to here? It's easy to show how I can do that and how the technology supports it. But at the end of the day, how do you manage the identity? I just talked about all the data that I have at the state of Michigan. I have rules out there that says, well, from the healthcare side of the house, only the doctor who has a need to know with the patient can see it. I don't know about you, but I never go to one doctor. I go to a doctor with a problem. He says, I want you to go see this specialist that they have a relationship with down the street. I go into that doctor. I fill out a whole new form. What's changed? It's still me. My medical record was electronified back there. Why can't this doctor say, well, because they haven't signed this piece of paper that says da-da-da-da-da. It's how do I share the information again? I have rules like that with sharing of financial data between the insurance business to the banking business and so forth. That's called the IRS. They have large compliancy rules on how you can share those data things out there. I have the privacy rules that say this is your personal one and you can't share it with anybody else unless you get the written permission. That was good when the data was not that broad-based, but now that everything is electronified, how do I manage my identity? How do you know this is Dave Devries standing up here? You have no idea. And I'll use this example. The picture that you saw on the bulletin or flashing through the screen here of me as a speaker here, that picture was taken before I got to the state of Michigan. And I sent it there because they said, we need to have a picture to go to the governor so he knows what you look like and so forth. I said, okay. So I sent him one. It had 2 flags behind it. And about a week or 2 after I sent it, I said, you ought to take that 1 flag off because it means nothing outside of the Department of Defense. So they photoshopped it. 1 flag left. Now there's no flags left. Is that really me? I just know because I know what I had on that day and what tie I had on and so forth. I know it's me, but you don't know it's me because that thing has changed so many times going through there. How can you trust that? What can you trust? I went through a repeat of 6 times to get my driver's license and my license tags when I came back to state. All but for the last 9 years, I had a Michigan driver's license. All that time in the military, I'd come back every 8 years and get the new ID card and so forth. And I had a Michigan driver's license, because you can do that. But when I retired from the military, I wound up in the state of Virginia, so I had to get a Virginia driver's license, and I could no longer have the Michigan one. I come back after 9, 10 years to Michigan. It was like I was starting from scratch. Sir, we have no record of you. How can that be? And then for me to get past the first gate there, the second time, I had to show them a proof of my Social Security number. And they wanted to see my little piece of paper that I know I have it somewhere. It's in a packing box someplace. I don't know where it is today, but I know I have one. And I'm going, really? That just has my number on it. And I'm carrying it so you think it's my number. I could give that to anybody down the street. That does not prove who I am. And I showed all these other things that had my Social Security number on it someplace. Didn't matter. I had my passport there. I had all this stuff. I need to know that you're Dave Devries with this Social Security number. That's what we're talking about with data and security and identity, because at the end of the day, like all this voting stuff that you're hearing about, how do I know that your vote that you passed there, Dave, is really you, and that it counted fairly and squarely? All but 5 states rely, and Michigan is one of them, not one of the 5, but the other ones. We are paper-based voting. Am I secure? Electronically, yes. The biggest threat I have there is if you drop that ballot in and it gets tallied up and then they take the paper versions of those things and transport it. If somebody were to destroy it or something, you would have a loss of it. So there's a physical aspect to this whole thing yet. But again, every country is going through the same challenge of how do I take the votes in a democratic society and do it securely and then still transmit it. Across the states now, there are 5 states that still do purely electronic voting. And some of those are on obsolete, antiquated type systems. They're worried about them, and they should be, because we never thought about cybersecurity with some of those voting systems. We're doing it today. And we're doing that across the board, but it's a slow roll, but we've got to keep on pushing it there. So yes, we are doing some initiatives with blockchain. I am relying more heavily on what industry is doing with it, because they have more money, and they can make those mistakes and still correct for it. My business is like other businesses across the state. Gone is the day when it was the agricultural scene and a few other things, and the technology was kind of in the federal space and in the state space. Now the technology, the innovation is in the business world. And I need to adapt that. I need to move quickly to adapt it to support my business operations, but I can't be the one that is funding and driving the technology changes. That's coming from around us here. That's you guys.
Good morning, Mr. Devries.
Morning.
Thank you very much for your presentation here today. From a personal perspective, I'm very much interested in the health information exchange platform for the state of Michigan. And I'm wondering if you would be able to offer us some update about exactly what is the direction that the state of Michigan is taking in procuring a safe, practical, interoperable HIE platform, as many of the other states have had for some decades. Well, about a decade now, such as Indiana, Massachusetts, and several others that have even joined several states together in order to provide that. Michigan, especially in West Michigan with the medical mile, the corridor through 96 from east to west, it seems to me it's unavoidable, and something has to happen in order to share that information for the 9 million population and 83 counties. So I would appreciate if you would be able to offer some update on that, please. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to look at Elliot here. I think this is a non-attribution room. Non-attribution? Yep.
What do you mean by that?
Well, I'll speak. I'll speak as Dave Devries here. So I said a little bit about my background. One of my things was for 30 years, I was that mobile patient. I lived around the world. I had a wife. I had 3 daughters. They were given care inside the medical facility that I would be given care of. But I was always the primary reason why we got medical, because they wanted to keep me healthy. I wanted to keep my family healthy. And so if we lived overseas someplace, they would often see a local doctor, a local hospital downtown someplace. Even there, the nations that where I served at and so forth, we had electronic records. How do I come back here and now have my family back here and I move back here and keep the same history of all those things rather than carrying paper copies? For me, I carried paper copies because that's what the Army wanted to see until about 20 years ago, and then it all became digital. My last few years in, I worked with a lot of the requirements to exchange all those digital records of service members with the Veterans Association across the river. We had that done. You may read about it in paper. We have different things. Malarkey. Electronic records works. It's been working for 15 years. Now the problem is, my record going across to the VA is for what purpose? It's really not about the continuing of my health care. It is documenting my health care against known things that may have happened in my life for benefits. So you have to align my medical records up now with where I was, what I was doing to cause me now to have this condition. That is not medical record. That's some other kind of record. In the case of the military, it's our service personnel record. It's where you were assigned. When did you go overseas to do this or that? And you correlate that space and time with this medical condition. That becomes the thing that drives my benefit. This is all paper yet. That is someplace else. No, you can't have that because that's a personal thing. That's not a medical thing. You can give the medical record to the VA, but you can't do the personal thing. How do you have this conversation with members of Congress? I've been there for hours. It's hard. And so the same thing happens here. We have hospitals on the east side of the state, on the west side of the state, on the north side of the state. Hospitals are being bought out. They're become part of larger hospital organizations, like Sparrow's one, and I forget the one here on the west side. But how do they share information there? Because that is also an economic benefit to them as a hospital. How do I protect this record? How do I form my strategic partnerships with all these specialty clinics and so forth there? The standards that go into making up a medical record are pretty much standardized. You have to really work hard to be a practitioner out there and not conform to the standards or not know what the standards are. That's the best thing that's happened, is that we do have standards out there. Now it's a case of how do I protect it through the HIPAA laws and meet the privacy requirements and so forth to do it. The hospitals have a need to do that, and they're doing more and more of it. There's another parallel group of, just as you would have doctors and nurses and practitioners who wanted to share this information, guess what? There's a band of a lot of smart folks tying together now to protect that information. The chief information security officers of these various hospitals. And they have formed, underneath the pushing from the governor and from Dtmb about 3 years ago, they had their own 501 Charlie now to how do I secure this thing? How do I do these things? We need more of those type of organizations to do that stuff, because I need to share this stuff, but I need to protect it too. That is happening. We do a lot of sharing right now in the state of Michigan. The problem is that what I work today with you, if I change jobs, that how-to and the ability to get that may go away because it's built on relationships. And as technology changes, as other things change inside the hospitals, you have to keep on reinventing that stuff. That's where it takes this type of grouping here to discuss those things, to come back together and work on it. That's why I run what I call my formal organization. I also have a very informal thing. One of my groups that I have is a whole bunch of people on my Rolodex, and they're called my kitchen cabinet. They're from industry. They have nothing to do with the state, but it's how do we share common things there from the industry, whether it be energy, whether it be medical, whether it be pharmaceutical, to a few things. How do you share some of the challenges you're seeing in your sector? Because we're all facing the same thing here. So that is happening. And my goal is to do more and more of this breakdown stuff of where the data is. At the state level, I do have a lot of the longitudinal data on the medical side of the house, because the hospitals are required to turn it in, and then we have to do things with it to get it up to the big place in the sky. Our challenge is, how do I make it so that it's more user-friendly to share that stuff there? It has always been looked at for the past 30 years. How do I flow data in? It is not about how to share it out. So we're breaking down some of those things, and you'll see some of that happening over the next year or two.
Thanks so much, Director, for coming, and appreciate your service both to the state and to our country. It's a perfect tie into what you just mentioned around sharing the data that your department in the state has. So I do business and economic research for a nonprofit here in the West Michigan area, and I'm also part of a regional group that does, it's a research network. And one of the things that we're looking to do is do more data advocacy. And one of the areas that we've focused on, and the struggles that we all encounter, is accessing the publicly available data that the state has access to, whether it be the labor market information, which is under your department, and they're great partners. Jason Palmer there, I work with them very closely. Accessing that data is not easy. It's very clunky. Department of Education, being able to pull out data that we need to make local decisions and regional decisions is very clunky to get access to. DEQ data goes on. And so I'm just curious, from your perspective, and I know you're kind of the administration's winding down here, locally, regionally, what can folks like myself, organizations that I interact with and belong to, can do to help advocate on the state level so that the state's data systems are more accessible so that we can get the information we need to help inform decision making?
I love the question there, thank you. Here's the problem. I think my sharing mechanism is great. Of all the state data, I think it's wonderful. I have it open, I have this and that. That's my perception. And until just now when I heard you, I thought I was perfect. The problem is we think we're perfect, and we know we're not, but we think we are, because I don't get this feedback. I need the specifics on it. I would tell you, Paul Grohl's in there, these guys, there are some days they don't want to come to work because I may have been to a conference like this or something, and I have a few ideas or a few questions. So I need that kind of feedback. But you need to help feed it back to us in terms of specifics. And again, and you did a great job of this, do it from a sector or from a open view, not I am company X and I want to know da-da-da-da-da, which gets into a very source thing. Because you're very restrictive then, and your other ways to get that from me is do a FOIA request. And a FOIA request, if it comes in like that, I may have to do it, but I have to do work on it, and it's going to come back and you're going to wind up paying for it because it's going to take a lot of man hours. And you're going to get data that you're going to look at and say, why did I get this from him? Because of the other rules I got to abide by. My open data, the stuff that's shareable, that's, if it's not usable, you need to come back and tell us that, and tell us what type of open stuff you need to have there and what would make it better there for the state. I have no bones. It's just, I live in a glass house. I think it's perfect, but I need you guys to tell me that. You told me this, and I can't get in there. I can't get this, I can't get that. It's not a good answer, but it's, again, I need specifics because I do have so many things. The medical side, you know, what's interesting is I, as a state CIO, and the chief data officer, I may be responsible for the whole thing, but the actual release of that data by the different rules is done by the business owner on it, and that is the DHHS in our case there. So each one of those things, I can't override them. Trust me, some of my biggest, some of my more interesting conversations is with other directors about their data and how can I share it out. And you mentioned some of the favorite ones.
First of all, I appreciate the presentation and thank you for your service. My name is Jabril Lockhart. I too left Michigan, not as long as you did, but for about 15 years and just returned a couple months ago to start a business. My question is about talent and some of the maybe formal or informal initiatives that you may be aware of or be a part of that you can kind of educate us about, because
Sure.
as an investor and business owner, I'm interested in recruiting data scientists and top talent from around the country, and we've been successful so far in recruiting talent from Ohio and Virginia and other places. But as we build our data company, we'd like to partner with the public sector in finding ways and understanding what the priorities are in terms of making it more attractive to live and move back to Michigan.
Yeah. Great question there again. So I told you what my day job was and my nighttime job, and then I got a whole bunch of other jobs that the governor keeps giving me. One that I had the pleasure of serving on this past year was the Marshall Plan for Talent. And that was rolled out a few months ago, and it's still underway, and it's the grant writing thing, going back to communities of how the education system can partner with businesses to get money in to pay for teachers to do certain things, to pay students to get certificates, because not every student is destined to go to a 4-year university or advanced degree. I have a son-in-law like that. I love him to death. He's smart. He's smart as a whip. You couldn't tie him into a seat in a 4-year college program. If you could, I'd pity the poor college. But I mean, I love him to death. He's smart as a whip. He's getting certificates. He can do things that I have rarely seen inside graduate level students. I want to encourage that. He can get a well-paying job. He started his own company. He's doing good. But why can't they do that work with other employees or other employers? They can't. Our problem is we grew up in saying you have to have a 4-year degree to get hired. You can't be a data scientist unless you have 4 years degree from this university, and then you have to have this thing here behind you. And I do not agree with that. That is not the case. But at the same time, as an employer, I also know that if I post a job, remember I talked about moving those shells around? If I post a job, I'll have 800 applications. If I put in there, you must have a 4-year degree. Then I get it down to 800. If I don't put that in there, I get thousands. How do you begin to look through 1,000 different applications for a job, every other day if you're a company with a turnover rate there? You can't. And so through the years, we have put in pre-qualifiers that say you must have a 4-year degree, you must have this or that. The governor just signed out a thing that says for state stuff now, you cannot put the first block is, do you have a felony record? You can't ask that in the first part of the interview. If your job requires something that would be preventable by that, then that can come later on. But the first question is no longer, do you have a felony? Because that just rules out a whole lot of folks. And it doesn't take into account that when I was younger, I made a mistake. I'm now working past that thing. Give them a chance. So again, is how do I tie this thing? So Marshall Plan for Talent, if you haven't heard about it, go research it online. It's out there. The basis of that is by regional areas, is this consortium, this pact between businesses and educators, high schoolers and colleges, community colleges and so forth, of how they're going to work together to bring up this stream of workforce, excite them, provide them the challenging jobs here in the state, and let them work for it as they go on. Either they get a 4-year degree or they become part of the workforce there. Why not? So that's the Marshall Plan for Talent. Another one that's out there for a couple of years now is Rising Tide. Again, looking more to the economically strained communities to provide incentives for them to provide certificates and job opportunities there, working there. Our biggest challenge is here, the number of workforce even available here. I mean, it's a supply and demand problem. It's not a, can I train up enough? We don't have enough people here. And if we don't get enough more people attracted into this wonderful state called Michigan, then we show some projections that looks like we're short maybe now 100,000 right now. In a couple of years, we're going to be over 800,000 short. Just job people across medical, across advanced manufacturing, across the IT field, across advanced studies. It's staggering. But it's not Michigan alone. We're competing for the other 49 states too. So again, there's no nirvana there. But I would, as I say to my grandkids now, you have opportunities. Now you just have to go, apply yourself. It's a work ethic. And that's, again, I hold that dearly. I think that was instilled in me coming from the Western Michigan side of the house. We need that because then you can just have fun out there and just keep doing great stuff there. Does that answer your question, sir?
Director Devries, I really like where this conversation has gone, especially to quality of life and quality of service issues. And I always appreciate when a speaker engages the audience in an exchange of pertinent questions. So thanks to those who asked those questions, and thank for your forthcoming answers. We probably have time for maybe one more short question and answer if there is one more. Otherwise, due to time limitations, we're going to have to cut this off soon. Is there one more question that's short? Anyone? If not, then please join me in thanking Director Devries for a wonderful talk.
Thank you for all you do. Thank you.